All right, welcome. My name is Lyle Murphy, and I'm the founder of the Alternative to Med Center. And if you have any problems with alcohol or you know someone that does, this is probably the most important information you will ever hear if you haven't heard this information, because this goes way past anything that really has been successful up to date. So there is a concept of an addictive biochemistry, one that actually draws the individual on a physiological level to be pulled towards certain things, to be pulled towards stimulants, to be pulled towards sedatives. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is someone drawn to alcohol or stimulants or heroin? Like, that's the thing there? Is it because their childhood was variant in varying degrees of trauma, or that their spiritual upbringing lacked a certain faith, or that psychologically they're just a little different in their dispositions? Well, yes, and also, obviously, there's something more going on here. There is a physiologically driven components behind these, and we're going to cover those. And my firm opinion is, despite what your intervention is, as far as spirituality, as far as your psychological interventions, unless this physiological aspect is attended to, by and large, it's a white-knuckling effort towards failure. And I've seen it over and over again. And fixing these things gives a person, if you don't crave the thing that you're addicted to, then it takes an extra step to actually chase after that thing, because it's not pulling you. You'd have to actually go, let's try that again, but you're not actually compelled to. So the number one reason, and we're going to go over 5 reasons that are very separate and distinct, why people drink, why they're pulled to alcohol, and why they get stuck there. The number one that captures about 75% of the people is hypoglycemia. And we're not talking about your average, ordinary, garden variety of fasting blood sugar hypoglycemia. We're talking about a pattern of hypoglycemia that is actually missed on a fasting blood sugar. So I have a little model here for you of what this reactive hypoglycemia looks like. It would actually be better termed hyperinsulinism, which means you produce too much insulin. So this is the fasting blood sugar. And this particular person would be normal at about 80. It's just right above 75 here. Now, when this person consumes a sugary drink, or that thick liquid on what they call a glucose tolerance test, the blood sugar demonstrably goes up. But then there's an insulin dump that occurs here at the apex and actually over mops up the sugar so that it drops them down below the baseline. So this would be equivalent to about maybe 55. That has symptomatology. This orange area right here is where they're below the baseline, and all kinds of crazy stuff can happen in here. So this blood sugar swing is a bit of a roller coaster. And alcohol, what is alcohol? Realistically, it's a liquid sugar. So when a person is dropping below their baseline for sugar, it's an emergency crisis situation to the brain. It defies social upbringing. It defies who's going to be mad at you again for drinking. It defies who you have a faith in many times. And yes, there is a spiritual malady component to this. And the brilliance behind, Bill Wilson and Bob in the Big Book and how they viewed it is very extremely spot on. But there was something missed along the way, and Bill actually picked it up, but was denounced by his own doctors. And he put out a couple of pamphlets talking about niacin. Niacin helps metabolize this sugar phenomenon. But there's something even deeper here. The alcohol is a liquid sugar. And so when the brain is going beep, 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 and then all the bells and whistles are going off and the sirens are alerted, there's a drink right there. So here's how you can tell these type of people. The number one, this is almost pathognomonic. In other words, when you see this, it defines the actual process itself, is when a person is not drinking, they crave sugar. If they have periods of respite with drinking, they're craving sugar. And what if, of course, do they serve at the meetings? A lot of times sugar. They're running the same addictive biochemistry. They're actually running the same physiology with the sugar. And as I've seen in the AA models, not denouncing the AA models, working with a sponsor and all that is spot on. But not addressing to the physiology is not. And what I've seen in these places is that there's a high fail rate. And it's because they're not fixing this particular problem. It's a crisis situation in the brain. The brain is just trying to survive and will do or manufacture whatever drama it takes in order to say, hey, it's okay to do that. So when you see somebody that's craving sugar when they're not drinking, that's the number one sign. Another pattern for these folks is they tend to not eat breakfast. They will wake up, they'll drink coffee, they'll go off to work. They might have a little lunch, they might not. They might eat out of the vending machine, and then they come home and eat and then start drinking. That's not mutually exclusive to be the hypoglycemic alcoholic, but it tends to be one of the patterns you can see. Another pattern is where they drink all day. They just kind of maintain a steady state of drinking, keeping their blood sugar somewhat level so they're not going through those crisis spots. And these hypoglycemic folks tend to be an everyday drinker. You will see them drinking pretty much every day. Functional drinkers, they can be functional drinkers, but by and large, you're looking at people who are, for lack of a better term, moody. Because the pattern of that blood sugar process is there's anger and red face, going on. It's basically sugar rage. So the correction for this type of person, and to really get to this, take these words seriously. You got to do this one right. You have to eat protein-based foods. You got to get rid of the sugars. You cannot subsist off of sugars and carbohydrates and think that you're going to get out of this one. The people who fit the definition of dry drunk are actually, generally, if you look at how they're living, they're managing their addiction with sugar instead of alcohol. And they still have that, kind of ragey disposition. To break that, the orthomolecular diet for this is to eat 6 times a day protein-based foods. Snacking on a bag of green beans, small meals, 6 times a day so that the blood sugar can stabilize. Protein burns like a log where sugar burns like gasoline on a fire. So you want to maintain what's happening in the pancreas, the adrenals, get it to stabilize out for at least 60 days. That can cure these cravings. These folks can actually pull out of this. And it's not as hard as you think. I don't want to underestimate it. It's hard as hell, but it can be simplified by getting your diet in line. Another thing is for any of the dispositions, adding B vitamins, because any simple carbohydrates, sugars, alcohols, they're burning up your B vitamins. They take a carbohydrate, a simple carbohydrate, needs a B vitamin in order to make a calorie. So it burns up your B vitamins. You want to put that stuff back in there by taking at least B complex, B1, B2, B3 are the main ones, but a full spectrum B vitamin can be very helpful in these cases as well. So that's the hypoglycemic. The next one is the allergic addicted, and their drinking pattern is much different. When someone that is allergic to alcohol drinks, it doesn't take long for them to be acting quite out of pocket. 1 drink, 2 drinks, and they're red in the face, their cheeks turn red, and their personality can shift dramatically, acting completely psychotic. And largely it's because they don't have whatever enzymes that it takes to break down alcohol. There's a few. There's the CYP2E1, there's catalase, there's aldehyde dehydrogenase. Certain dispositions, certain racial dispositions, like Pacific Islanders, Asians, Native Americans, tend to have little gaps in the way that they can break down the ethanol into acetaldehyde. So it can build up, it can form an allergic reaction, and anytime there's an allergic reaction, you're talking about inflammation. And when you have inflammation, the body is going to release endorphins and enkephalins in order to buffer the pain that would be caused by that inflammation happening in the gut and in the body. Those endorphins, guess what? They're very addictive. So people get addicted to their own endorphins. So they keep hitting the same button over and over and over again so that they can get that response. It happens with food addictions as well, not just alcohol. But those folks, you want to do an endorphin protocol on. And since the next one actually is an endorphin deficiency as well, I'll save the endorphin protocol for after the next one. The next disposition is called THIQ, tetrahydroisoquinolines. Now, this is also an endorphin deficiency, but the pattern's different. The way that they get there is different. In fact, it's a lot cheaper for the allergic addicted to get to the goal than it is this particular person, because the THIQ person, and I had just read, I was doing a little research just to make sure I had all my facts straight. There was this woman named Virginia Davis, how they discovered that certain dispositions were producing THIQ, which is a very potent opiate-like compound. It's actually more potent than heroin. Back in World War II, they were, morphine and trying to come up with ways that were less addictive than morphine. And they found out that the THIQ is way more addictive than morphine. So, but this woman, Virginia Davis, she was doing cancer research. It's sort of like this odd way of figuring this out. And she needed fresh brains. I mean, recently morbid persons that were still basically warm in order to do whatever cancer research she was doing. And she was running around with a patrolman, and they were picking up recently dead drunks. And when she found one that I guess was somewhat warm, I know it's kind of morbid, but she would do take the brain out and do her research. Well, she was amazed to find that, and she mentioned to the patrolmen that, wow, I didn't realize that all these alcoholics were also doing heroin. And the patrolmen were like, they're not doing heroin. That's an expensive habit. These folks can barely afford, whatever those little 1 ounce shots are, small amounts of alcohol. And she's like, well, there's this THIQ in there. Well, after more research, they found out that certain dispositions will take the aldehyde that would normally break down in the metabolism into what's the equivalent of vinegar. A little bit of this gets shunted into the brain of certain types of dispositions and forms this opiate-like compound. So in all actuality, they're getting addicted to an opiate. They're the endorphin deficient disposition, which we'll talk about. But these guys are really hooked. And how you can tell this particular type of person, they generally have a phenomenal liver, because they can drink like 15 shots or so. I mean, they can drink a large amount of alcohol, because it takes a large amount of alcohol to make this THIQ in the first place. You're talking just little micrograms of it at a time. But they can keep going and keep going and keep going because they get great livers and produce this. So they're the life of the party. They generally get they don't get drunk as much as they get kind of high off of the alcohol. And they, eventually they fall down too. But they're not like the other drinkers that moderate themselves. They can just go on and on and on and on and on and on. So to treat that person, you have to do an endorphin protocol, just as you do for the last one. Now, an endorphin protocol is going to be eating protein-based foods. Now, whether you're vegan or whether you're a carnivore or a mix of both, an omnivore, the philosophy aside, there are amino acids that are necessary. You can get them from vegan, you can get them from meat-based, but you have to have the building blocks to make the endorphins in the first place. And sugars, simple carbohydrates, all that stuff don't have them. So you have to eat protein-based foods. Specifically, if you want to drill down into some amino acids, DLPA and methionine are some good choices. They help manufacture endorphins. Now, if a person has anxiety, like anxiety is the backbone of their experience in the world, not just when they're not drinking, but it's just kind of like in their profile, DLPA could potentially cause them to be more anxious. So if you're going to try DLPA or methionine, try a little bit of it in the morning, see how you do with it. Exercising, Cardio is good for any disposition, really, but the thing that really will build the endorphins is the weightlifting. For people that, can do it. Obviously, a lot of people that have endorphin problems have chronic pain issues as well, and have to limit what they can do as far as weightlifting type exercise. But how muscle cells differentiate is when you put tension and stress on them, you'll get one cell that'll pop into two. And that tearing of the fibers, and the lactic acid and everything afterwards is kind of a byproduct of also from endorphin. You're going to synthesize endorphins to kind of buffer that pain. So it's a way to kind of just get a person juiced up. Reducing the inflammatory foods, a big one. People don't really realize, and I've seen it so much, it's just been ridiculous. Like people with chronic pain, wow, on all kinds of opiates. You get them off the inflammatory foods, and you're, and they're all of a sudden like, hey, healed, because we produce up to 200 milligrams of morphine, depending on our genetic disposition per day. Well, let's say you have a bad genetic disposition. You don't produce as many endorphins or enkephalins as most people. You just have your biological pathways are kind of muted. So let's say you produce 100 milligrams. Now you're eating inflammatory foods that also are causing your body to release what little you have in order to buffer the pain that you normally be feeling. Just chipping away at those reserves you get below a certain level, it can turn into a chronic pain issue and can also turn into an endorphin deficiency that causes a person to crave opiates to help them feel not only physically okay, but endorphins buffer the amount of emotion we pick up off other people. That's why people cut, because it releases endorphins and it gives them an emotional distance between them and other people. And our most savvy artists in the world are geared for being able to feel other people's emotions. And then they get famous, they feel everybody's attention on them, and it overwhelms their endorphin levels. It's it's beautiful in its own way if it's regulated right, but it can also be very painful because the world that we live in is not that kind to people who can feel a lot. That was number 4, inflammatory foods. 5, stopping smoking. Smoking. Well, this one came out of NIDA, which is the National Institute of Drug Addictions, I believe is the acronym. And they found that people who have an opiate addiction are 3 to 4 times as likely. I know we're talking about alcohol, but in this particular thing, we're talking endorphin deficiency. They found that people who are smoking are 3 to 4 times more likely to relapse on an opiate. It could be just because, I don't know, it could be for a lot of things. Just not feeling good from smoking, but it could also be the arsenic. We have some clinical evidence to support that arsenic is a toxic impairment to endorphin synthesis. We haven't proven it yet, but we've just seen correlates where people with the endorphin deficiency persona also have high arsenic on their metals exams. So it's something that we've put precedent on. Again, the more of these things that you do, so maybe you do 5 out of 6. So you have a 5 out of 6 chance of being successful. If you do 6 out of 6, you're probably going to get a grip on this, in whether it's an endorphin deficiency for opiates or whether it's driving the alcohol addiction. It's still an endorphin deficiency. So for these 2 dispositions. Number 6 is getting out of emotionally charged environments. So now let's say you've got inflammatory diet, you're genetically geared low for endorphins, and you feel like somebody's going to kill you all the time. Well, the body's natural response to survive, like some people are just tanks to other people's emotions. They got a very thick skin, okay? But you take that same person, you put them in a situation where they're bombarded by threats, by people trying to kill them, by, say, their kid that's has a parent that's beating them or has a whatever molestation thing going on. They literally think they're going to die. That's going to chip away at their endorphins because the endorphins are trying to buffer all of that intensity. And what happens is with the lower endorphin state, you actually can feel things around you more, and you can feel those threats more attunedly. It's a survival thing. So if you're trying to build up your endorphin states, you got to get out of those charged environments that are draining you of your endorphins. So those are the 6 things that go along with endorphin deficiency, and definitely apply to number 2 and to number 3, the allergic, addicted, and the THIQ disposition. Okay, number 4. This one it's easier to explain, but it's also one of the more difficult dispositions, and that is anxiety. Well, it's easier to explain in some ways because anxiety is a broad term, but obviously when somebody wakes up in the morning and they're an everyday drinker and they don't have alcohol in their system, because alcohol, one of the challenges of alcohol is it leaves the body so fast. So urine withdrawal pretty hardcore first thing in the morning. That can cause the delirium tremens and just anxiety. We're not talking about that. We're talking about somebody who has anxiety as their baseline. They feel anxious, like their nervous system is standing in the middle of a freeway all of the time. And they don't want to take drugs. They don't want to take benzos. They know how addictive Xanax and that stuff is. And so they are trying to moderate their level of anxiety by drinking. It's just more acceptable to and they're self-medicating. It's not like they're wanting to be. These folks generally don't want to be drinking, but it's better than feeling the anxiety that they're feeling. And what we've found is that there is this neurotoxicity concept of where, from an environmental medicine standpoint, that people have accumulated neurotoxins in their nervous system that have skewed out how their nervous system can regulate itself. So when an excitatory neurochemical is released, there's an enzyme that breaks it down and reuptakes it. If that can't happen and it gets stuck out there, it's going to continue to exert a stimulatory effect in the nervous system. And these mechanisms are what are played upon when we're with insecticides like organophosphates, organocarbamates. They kill an insect by knocking out its nervous system by overstimulating it to death. And lo and behold, because of common features with us and insects and snails and other analogous traits, we use acetylcholine and these same neurotransmitters in our nervous system. So when we're eating the same thing that would be normally killing the bug, what do you think it's doing to us? I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. When you release this acetylcholine, which is very stimulatory, it causes muscle contraction, and you're poisoning the enzyme, the acetylcholine esterase enzyme, that would then clean that up, of course you're going to experience anxiety. Some people have the genetics in their liver to help break that stuff down better than others. And the people that don't, guess what? Excitotoxic. Mercury is another excitotoxic. So unfortunately, in these, where the anxiety is a constant disposition, and this is a hard one to do, because anxious people are oftentimes afraid to do anything, that they're in fight or flight. They're stuck in a fight or flight situation. They're afraid of everything, but you have to unpoison them. And it doesn't happen overnight. You have to put them through a physiological detox process where they're taking those organic poisons, like the pesticides, and biotransforming them into something that can get out of their system. These pesticides are fat soluble. I mean, they have to be. You don't want to wash them off with the orange or whatever. And the grasshopper crawls across it. It has like a waxy, can't remember what it's called. It's exoskeleton, but there's a name for what this exoskeleton has in it. But it basically just pulls up, like an osmotic way, just pulls up the pesticide, because it's also fat soluble, into its exoskeleton. Well, those fat soluble compounds, we don't just urinate those out. We have to transform them into water soluble form to excrete them. Otherwise, they accumulate in our nervous system. What is our nervous system largely composed of? Fat, phospholipids, and it binds there and forms a very these folks got it bad. They just the sheer hell they're going through is legendary. And to get these poisons out requires a strategist. So, and it can be they just use benzos as well. Anyway, so that's the anxiety disposition. People are just drinking so that they can keep their anxiety at bay. And number 5 is, I don't know, my certainty on the mechanism behind this one is, it's good, but it's not great. But the binge drinking, you have this person who will go out and they'll drink themselves into absolute oblivion do crazy things, but then they don't do it again for another couple weeks or another couple months. It is a bit of a mystery. When I talk to these folks, the common denominator for many of these folks, not all, but is some form of trauma. Something comes up and they start drinking and they start feeling it even more. And so they keep drinking until it shuts off. And a good trauma counselor, EMDR, we do trauma counseling and EMDR at the center. It can work with that. And another thing to know is that can you have hypoglycemia that's also a binge drinker? Yeah. Can you have these dispositions mix and match? Of course. And guess what? You have to attune to each one of the addictive physiologies of it in order to get a grip on it. But once you do, then all of the therapies of the AA model or the counseling or cognitive stuff can actually take you somewhere, because you're not being pulled around by the nose by the addictive physiology. So that's what I wanted to impart. If you have any more questions, please call our admissions counselors. We can, help nail down what your disposition is. There is a book worth reading. It's called 7 Weeks to Sobriety, that goes over a lot of this stuff and more. For those of you that want some at-home answers, I would highly recommend that book. Written a long time ago, but still a very, very, very pragmatic bit of information for the physiology of alcoholism. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll see you on our next leg. Bye now.